Hey, ADHDers and allies. Happy New Year to you all. I hope you started the new year off right by being kind to yourself, because life is hard, particularly when you've got ADHD or you support somebody with ADHD, because society is full of high expectations which we're constantly struggling to meet. It's never ending. We're kicking off the first podcast episode of the new year by talking about teenagers with ADHD and the difficulties of parenting. My guest is an Australian psychologist who has worked with many different teens with ADHD, and she's really been taking notice of the parents' difficulties when trying to manage it too. This has led her to create a parenting course to help parents understand what ADHD is and how it can be managed. I can't wait to get started. Joining me, I have Leanne Tran, who is a psychologist. And not just that, but she's based in Australia. So it's always great to get a different cultural perspective for ADHD in other countries as well. So welcome, Leanne. It's great to have you on the podcast show. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be where you are and like what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. I started out, I guess this is probably the short version, but when I studied psychology, my first position was then working with adults who were incarcerated and had drug and alcohol addictions, and I was doing a rehab program with them. And you probably know so many in Australia anyway, so many people who are incarcerated have ADHD or language disorders or other disabilities. But not only that, mental health and lots of other things. So it made me realize that I wanted to help people a lot earlier on. And that's why I moved into working with children. I really enjoy it. Kids and teenagers are just so much fun. So I've never really looked. But lately I've taken a bit of a twist because I recognize that it's parents who need a lot of support to be able to support their kids. And I try that in my private practice, but I feel like it's a bit that is missing for a lot of parents. So I'm providing online programs so that parents can easily access information about things like autism and ADHD and the strategies that can work for their children.
Wow. So you've had like a big perspective overall. With you being based in Australia, what's the kind of dynamic there? Because in the UK, obviously there's huge waiting lists for people with ADHD on all sides, children, teenagers, adults, the waiting list is huge. So by the time they get a diagnosis, it's difficult to access that support at an earlier stage. Do you find it's the same in Australia, or is it a little bit different there? Or
No, it is the same here. Yeah. And our process is much that generally pediatricians are ones who diagnose or assess and diagnose for ADHD, as well as psychologists. But because pediatricians often are the ones who prescribe medication as well, there's a long wait list for pediatricians. So that's why sometimes I'm seeing people who are in their teens and have only just. But it's also tricky for adults with psychiatrists generally managing ADHD, and they have really long wait lists as well. And so sometimes for families, it's not possible to access people. Yeah. But I always say to parents, though, that for their kids, you can start implementing some support before you have that official diagnosis. A lot of the time, it's a matter of affordability for families as well. But there are some great books out there that can try to give parents information before they're able to access a professional. But it's certainly a big barrier.
Yeah. And it sounds like you, from what you're saying, and I completely agree with you, by the way, that knowledge is power in that regard, that, the more information we have access to about things like ADHD, autism, the better equipped people will be.
I think the hardest thing is when you just don't know what to do as a parent. And so if there's some resources that can give a bit of a guide to make that not feel so uneasy for parents, it's a really good option.
Yeah, there's not a lot of information out there, is there, on teen ADHD? I mean, there's a lot of information out there about, ADHD in children, because obviously it's on the increase. Then they talk about ADHD in adults, but actually, there's a big in-between, isn't there? Because if you think about it,
teenagers are having all these factors thrust on them. So if they have ADHD as well, they're having to face things like peer pressure, hormones coursing through their body, all of which will impact the ADHD. When you see these teenagers with ADHD, do you find that there's a lot of overwhelm there and a lot of factors at play?
Yeah, definitely. Because you're right, there's lots of information for parents of young children and then adults who can kind of seek their own help.
Yeah.
And teenagers are a little bit in the middle. And I think the trouble too, and you would know this, is that with ADHD, it can tend to follow a course in which if the young person's not supported, then they can develop things like anxiety or learning problems and then disengagement from school. And so I find if that's a path that someone's gone down, then in the teenage years, they've just got quite a lot going on. So that really does lead to that overwhelm. The other difference, I think, is that it was interesting when I learned this in my master's program that I've recently done, but it's like teenagers often then stop taking their medication as well if they have been prescribed it, because they want to take control of their own life and it's where they want to become their own person. And so that's where the strategies that either teens themselves or for parents to put in place become extra important as well.
Wow. That's such a good point, isn't it? Because with being a teenager comes a lot of, self-identity, kind of discovery, lots of exploration of different things. So yeah, I never thought of it like that, in the fact that, choosing not to take medication is potentially a form of control. Because when I was 17, I actually opted not to take medication. But I also think another factor at play was when I was 17, I don't think it was seen as a condition that really affected adults anyway. It was like, oh, you're an adult.
Yeah, exactly.
You can get on with it.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah. Do you find a lot with these families of teenagers, parents in particular, there's a link, isn't there? Like, the ADHD in a lot of cases is hereditary. When sometimes these parents might have got missed with a diagnosis. So not only are they trying to parent a teen who's got ADHD themselves, which is incredibly hard for anyone, neurotypical, people anyway. And then obviously having to combat ADHD they didn't even know they had. That's another factor in there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's such a common thing and it can present it a few different ways. And the first one, I guess, is that parents can recognize ADHD in their kids but through that process, they become diagnosed themselves. Or sometimes I've even had parents who have been diagnosed themselves and then see it in their children and it goes that way. Or sometimes parents too can be unaware of their own ADHD, which either means that they don't really notice it in their kids because their kids are just like them, or they can struggle with the routine of parenting and then their kids have trouble because of that. So yeah, that's why I think that self-identity and understanding is great for teenagers as well as adults and even kids.
Wow. I mean, when you kind of think about all these factors that you just kind of went over, it's complete mind field, isn't it? A lot of the time in the UK, and I don't know if this is the case, that you're having to battle in Australia, parenting courses are given for ADHD, but it seems to be the only support that's offered. So then parents have this thing of, they almost feel like they're being shamed that, oh, it's my fault, I'm not parenting right. Is there a same kind of misconception in Australia that sometimes, it's the parents' responsibility and it's because a lot of the time, isn't it? It's like, we see a child who's misbehaving and we assume perhaps that child's neurotypical and then they're behaving badly and straight away we're like, oh, the parents can't control their child, the parents can't control their teen. And that's not the case, is it? So is there that kind of misconception over in Australia as well?
I think there is, yeah. And because I find myself often to parents quoting the research about how it's actually ADHD that changes the way parents parent rather than parenting causing ADHD. So yeah, the research actually shows the typical parenting stuff often doesn't work because children are just developing differently. But I think there is often that stigma around about it. I think too, because the first line treatment here is medication once kids are 6 and there is some behaviour intervention that can be done, but it tends to not be very common. But interestingly, it's more common when working with teenagers, that things like cognitive behaviour therapy and that kind of stuff can be more helpful. So there's this kind of patch in the middle where there's medication, there's sometimes parenting's recommended, but not always. And so parents can be left a bit lost knowing what to do.
And do you have any kind of strategy, or do you kind of have to combat that when obviously talking about your courses for parents in terms of trying to understand their child, understand that, their teenager, their behaviour? Do you have to explain to parents, look, this isn't a shaming thing, it's just about learning your child isn't following a neurotypical development, so you shouldn't be following neurotypical parenting, really?
Yeah, that's the approach I take, where I kind of say that there's nothing wrong with your parenting, because most of the time there's not. It's just that you possibly don't have the information about ADHD and the ADHD brain, and then the strategies that go along with that, and talk about it in terms of, we all reach a point. Well, I think we all reach a point in our parenting where we're out of tools.
Yeah.
And that's the time to seek help. And yeah, there's lots of tools and strategies that are great for kids with ADHD. And it's most of the time, it's just that parents don't know about them yet.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to what you were talking about earlier, because I think it's a really excellent point. You were talking about, a lot of mental health issues stemming from ADHD when the right support isn't in place. And I think that's such an important discussion, because mental health is on the increase in teenagers. We're seeing all these difficulties, but actually ADHD in itself is on the increase as well. So I don't know if anyone's ever done a study about the correlation there, but it's a really interesting discussion to have. Do you think the key to tackling mental health with ADHD is just having the right support in place, or do you think there's other kind of things that need to be done?
That's a really good question. And I feel a bit glad that you're not going to ask me about the studies that have been done, because there are some. I just wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head. But yeah, there's definitely, when there's ADHD, there's an increased chance of lots of other things, including anxiety and depression, that they're probably the two main ones, or self-medicating with drugs and that kind of thing. There is definitely a correlation. I think in terms of what kids need, there's probably one group of kids who, if they just receive support for their ADHD, might be on a path where they don't develop any mental health challenges. But there's probably a group who will develop those things anyway, either because there's a family history of it, or for the experiences that they're going through, or they're vulnerable to those things. But I think it would be, in those cases, it will still be easier to manage if kids have had support for ADHD throughout their childhood, because then they are just managing the mental health difficulties rather than both at the same time.
Narrows it down, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think putting support in place is designed to help someone with their day-to-day functioning. And the better that's going for them, the better their mental health will go and the better outcomes they'll have. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And unfortunately, it's the same case in the UK as you were saying it is in Australia, where it is medication first. And there isn't as much focus on some of these other strategies. Actually, it's taken a holistic approach, isn't it, to that person, instead of just, medication is the answer. I'm not anti-medication. I do believe that medication can work, and it's a very individual decision. But then there's not a lot for people who choose to not go down the medication route, which is why I think the work you're doing is, again, so important.
Yeah, I agree. And I think too, if you think, or if parents are getting the message that medication's the only option, then when their child's going through tough times, what they might automatically think is that they need more medication. And there's often just so much more going on there. It's family dynamics and how parents are approaching behavior and managing the ADHD symptoms, as well as the potential mental health. So yeah, awareness and support, I think, is really important.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? So tell us a little bit about these courses that you've designed for parents, because obviously you know what you're talking about. So I'm thinking, how do you even go about doing something like that? Because it must be quite a big thing at first. So how did this come about?
Yeah, it is a big thing. And I think it took me a long time to get my head around it. I took a long time wondering if it's something that's even needed as well, because there is information on the internet and in books and that kind of thing. But I found myself saying or having the same conversations with parents a lot over time. And I found it was really common that they would be told their child had ADHD, but then they'd say to me, but I don't really understand what that means, or I don't know what I need to do. And my focus was to try to instill or take all of that information and advice I was giving parents frequently into something they could access in an easier way. So because there's wait lists for psychologists as well. So this is something parents can do while they don't need to be waiting on a list to see someone. And I think I try to combine information with then providing support throughout so that parents know how they can tailor their program or, the strategies from the program to their individual kids and families, because sometimes that I think is the bit that's missing. And some feedback from families too has been that they have a shelf full of parenting books. It's just getting the time to sit down and go through it all, whereas an online course lets people digest it in little manageable chunks, so maybe 10 minutes at a time, and come back to it later, which is great for an ADHD brain, right?
Yeah.
And those are often the types of parents that I'm working with. Yeah, so I tried to take all of the strategies I've learned from different kind of places and combine it in a package that gives education, but also practical tools and strategies.
That's good. And that's a lot of the time what's missing, isn't it? Because in terms of approach in the UK, it's not really a holistic approach, because what a lot of people don't tend to understand about ADHD is it's not just about that individual with ADHD. Of course, they are at the centre, but it's also about the parents, which obviously you're trying to help. It's about the teachers. It's about everyone surrounding that person being better equipped to help them to manage it.
Yeah, exactly.
So what kind of things have you commonly been seeing in teens with ADHD or in parents? Have they been, what kind of things have they been saying to you in terms of the kind of behaviours they're dealing with? Like, are they at their wits' end? Do they feel like there's no hope? What kind of point have you seen them in, I suppose, when they've gone that long without getting a diagnosis or that long without getting the right support?
The parents are often worn out and feel overwhelmed themselves. And there's this sense too of like some of the common behaviours that they find difficult are that they feel like their kid just doesn't listen to them, doesn't follow their instructions. And that's hard enough when kids are little. But when you're talking about teenagers, it becomes a bit of a bigger deal. Yeah. And sometimes it's even, so with teenagers too, impulsivity and that kind of thing. And risk taking is higher in adolescence. So sometimes there's just this feeling of danger or not worrying about their children.
Yeah, and as a parent, it's hard not to take that personally, isn't it? As much as you love your child or teen, you keep persevering, you're doing everything you possibly can to show that you care, to show that you love them, and you're being met with failure from a certain perspective.
Yep.
So it's very hard not to take it personally as in, oh, this person doesn't like me because they're not responding to my efforts, basically.
Yeah.
It affects that relationship as well, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And teenagers are rude by nature. And then when you've got somebody who's maybe, speaks or acts before they think it through and doesn't seem to, care what you think as much, which can happen in ADHD, it can be really hurtful. And it's hard to keep the relationship but the relationship is what kind of keeps the family together and the kids on the right track. So parents are often, they recognize it's hard, but they know they have to keep at it, but they're just at their wits' end.
Yeah. It's like a catch-22, isn't it? Because that secure relationship in some ways helps to manage the ADHD. So it is obviously beneficial to have a secure relationship, but then the ADHD can cause that distance as well. So it's just a never-ending cycle, which again is why this course on being equipped with the right information is so, so important. In terms of education in Australia, do you think that's well equipped for dealing with ADHD? Because I know in the UK, do you find that the curriculum is very prescriptive? It's like, we'll learn this much by this kind of thing. And I think sometimes for the ADHD brain, particularly if it's not practical approach to learning, can be very difficult.
Yeah.
Do you find that's the same in Australia?
Yeah, I think it is. And there's definitely been an increase in the amount in the curriculum over the last couple of years. So that increases the pressure on teachers, but also on students. And I think we're getting better at catering for ADHD, but it's still not there yet. It differs a lot school by school. And I still have kids who say, I'm not allowed to use a fidget in the classroom, or I'm not allowed to stand up. And
that's huge though, isn't it? Something like, it sounds like, it might sound a small thing to anybody listening, but for someone with ADHD, that can be the difference between being able to listen and not being able to participate in class.
That's right. And then at the, on the more extreme end too, sometimes if the accommodations aren't there, it's the difference between a child being able to stay in the classroom or not. And that has massive implications on their learning. If they're missing time each year and they can't build on it the next year, that's really a disadvantage for those kids.
And it's so important, isn't it, to get it right as early as possible, because you do see a lot of links to ADHD, like you were saying, to addiction and to mental health issues. And that long term, I don't want to be extreme in this, but there is a correlation between people in prisons and the amount of ADHD, particularly in males who do have that impulsivity aspect and the risk taken back perhaps slightly more than girls do with ADHD. So it just highlights, doesn't it, that importance of getting it right earlier on. So where can parents access your courses? Is there a website that you use for this?
Yeah, and so that's what's exciting about it. Even though we're across the world from each other, parents can still access it. If they can put up with my accent, they're welcome to. And my website is learn.leannetran.com.au.
Right.
And then if you head there and put a learn.leannetran.com.au/free, there are some free download information about various different topics that parents can access as well.
With ADHD in this country, particularly for teens, is getting them to go to school in the first place. I have a friend who's got a child with suspected ADHD, and they can't even get them up. And they've actually just brought in fines in the UK. I don't know if you're aware of this. They brought in fines that parents, if their child isn't in evidence, then they're going to get fined, and they're being threatened with potential criminal action. And a lot of the time, these are SEND parents or parents of people with ADHD who are at their wits' end and who don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And half the time it's just getting them, because obviously teenagers, trying to get them out of bed in the first place is quite challenging. And then if you've got a teenager with ADHD who doesn't sleep well because of that sleep quality and stuff, then it becomes even harder, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. I think, and that's another reason for intervening early as well, because you want to get kids being able to manage school and enjoy it enough so that they don't disengage when they just can't handle it anymore. But I think that's a little bit rough to put it all on the parents there, because I think if kids aren't going to school, I think it's an equal responsibility of the parents and the school to really work together to try and get that happening. Yeah, that's adding pressure's not going to help. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And that's what it is, isn't it? So it's a more nurturing approach, because we see people approach ADHD. I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions around ADHD, isn't there? Like people with ADHD are lazy, or people with... So that doesn't help in terms of getting the right access to support at all, does it?
No, it doesn't. Yeah. I love that the education can stop people seeing it as some kind of moral failing of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, they understand it's ADHD. It's not just the quality of the person.
Exactly. Which just goes to show that, those misconceptions are deeply embedded. And like you said, it's about empowering people with the right information.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you very much for joining me. I think it's been really interesting, and I hope people go and check out your course because I think it will be really empowering. And I think that it's what a lot of parents of children and teens with ADHD need. They need something that's not going to shame them, but equip them with that information. So thank you very much.
Definitely my aim. You're welcome.
Well, that gives us a little insight into teens with ADHD and what a hard field it is to navigate for parents who just want to help their child or children. I look back on my years as a teenager, and even though I had a diagnosis of ADHD, I would never want to go back. It was so horrible having to deal with everything that comes with being a teenager, while also having issues stemming from ADHD too. That's all we've got time for today. Take care, ADHDers, and join us next month where we'll be talking to a jazz pianist who hails from LA about a software program he and his colleagues have designed, which is perfect for ADHDers who love music.